Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. It started with a silence so loud it filled the night air like a heartbeat too big for the chest it lived in. His fingers brushed the small of my back as I leaned against the hood. Not a possessive touch, but a release, a silent offering. The engine was still warm beneath me, the metal humming like it knew what was coming before any of us did. He stood just behind the lens, breath catching with every shift of my body, every glance I dared steal toward the stranger, whose shadow grew longer in the amber streetlight. It wasn't jealousy in his eyes. It was hunger. There was something electric about being seen like this, not just watched, but witnessed. I could feel the stranger's gaze settle between my thighs like a promise, like he'd been invited into something sacred and reckless. And my husband? Oh, he didn't flinch. He steadied the camera with hands that had loved me for years, but tonight, he held it like a man filming his own undoing. His mouth was slightly open, not from surprise, but reverence, like I'd become something he could no longer hold, only admire. When I moaned, it wasn't for the one touching me, not entirely. It was for the man just behind the frame, the one who needed to hear it more than anyone. And when he whispered, louder, it didn't sound like encouragement. It sounded like devotion. How did we get here? What quiet, twisted trust brought us to this edge where love turns itself inside out, and desire speaks louder than vows? It wasn't just about the sex, it never is. It was about surrender, about how far you're willing to go to show someone you're theirs, even when someone else's hands are on your body. But it didn't end there, because just as I cried out, legs trembling, the flash in his eyes changed, from curiosity to something much darker, a knowing. And right then I realized the camera wasn't just recording me, it was recording him, the kind of man he's always been underneath. And I was finally becoming the kind of wife he craved. The night air was thick, almost velvet soft against my skin, and every breath I took felt heavier than the last. I could hear the distant hum of cicadas in the trees, but closer, too close, there was only the sound of him. The man in front of me, the stranger, and the one behind me, the man who knew every curve of my body like a story he'd written, now choosing to step back and let someone else read it aloud. The stranger hadn't said a word yet. He didn't need to. His presence was louder than anything. He stood just inches from me now, not touching, not daring. But I could feel the heat rolling off him like a tide pulling at the shore. His eyes searched my face, not with greed but with something quieter. Reverence, maybe. Curiosity. Or was it restraint? I can stop this, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. But it wasn't a question, and no one answered. Behind me, I felt the subtle crunch of gravel as my husband shifted his stance, readjusting the camera. Still filming, still silent. But I knew his body well enough to hear what his breath was saying. Don't stop. Not yet. The stranger finally reached for me. Just his fingers, brushing mine. Accidental, maybe. Intentional, definitely. The contact was brief, but it cracked something open in me I hadn't realized was still locked shut. I met his gaze, and it didn't hold lust. Not yet. It held a question. Do you want this too? I didn't answer out loud. I didn't have to. because when I looked back at my husband, he nodded, slowly, like handing over the last piece of himself, and smiling while he did it. I turned back toward the stranger, chest tight, pulse erratic. There was a war happening inside me. Love, loyalty, longing. I had never felt more wanted, and yet never more torn. The air between our bodies throbbed with unspoken things, words that had weight but no sound. He stepped closer. I didn't move away. The space between us was smaller now, barely enough room for breath, let alone doubt. And still, neither of us moved. Not forward, not back. It was a quiet standoff of emotions too sharp to speak aloud. His eyes flicked down for half a second to my lips, then back up to meet mine. That simple glance was enough to set every nerve in my body alight. I heard the shutter click behind me again. My husband was still recording, still watching. But I could feel his energy shift, not jealousy, not fear, something closer to surrender. He had always been the kind of man who needed to see love to believe in it, and tonight he was willing to let it unfold right in front of him, even if it shattered everything we thought we knew. The stranger stepped in, slow, deliberate. His hand hovered just beside my hip, not touching, but close enough that my skin ached from the absence. I didn't breathe. Couldn't. My heart was pounding in my throat. "You sure?" he finally asked, his voice low, careful, as if one wrong syllable might break the spell. I nodded, barely, but my body betrayed me. My fingers twitched toward him, like they had a will of their own. He didn't grab them, just let his own hang there, open. An invitation, not a demand. But something stopped me. Not fear, not shame. Just the unbearable weight of wanting something too much. I pulled back, barely an inch, but enough. The air between us thickened instantly, like tension made visible. He didn't follow, didn't push, just looked at me, eyes dark with something that wasn't disappointment. It was understanding. "I don't think this is just about tonight," I said, voice thin. "No," he replied, watching me the way a man watches a flame he wants to touch, even if it burns. "It's not." The ache was almost worse than if we had crossed the line, because now it lived in that suspended space, just barely out of reach, too real to ignore, too dangerous to touch. And still, I didn't look away. Neither did he. The air didn't move, but everything inside it pulsed. The night felt like it was leaning in, too, holding its breath with us. His hand was still there, hovering, waiting for a signal that might never come. And mine? Mine was curled in my lap, clenched like it could hold back the tidal wave pressing against my chest. I could feel my husband's gaze behind me, steady, loyal, and almost unbearably quiet. But even he couldn't contain the storm anymore. I heard him exhale, sharp and uneven, like he was letting go of something he never expected to surrender. That sound cracked me wide open. "I dreamt about this," I whispered. The stranger blinked, slow. "About me?" "No," I said. "About this feeling. About being seen like this. And still loved." He looked down for a moment, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "You are seen," he said, voice rough around the edges. "That's what's killing me." I didn't know what he meant, not fully, but I felt it like a current running underneath every word. We weren't talking about just tonight. We weren't even talking about each other. We were talking about what was missing, and what had suddenly, impossibly appeared in this quiet, dangerous moment. He moved just slightly, not toward me, but beside me, until his chest was nearly against my knees. His hand finally brushed mine. Just a whisper of skin on skin. And somehow that feather-light touch felt louder than any kiss. I didn't pull away. His fingers closed over mine, not tight, just there, present, warm, terrifying. I can't tell if this is the start of something, I murmured, or the end. He didn't answer. He just leaned his forehead against mine, not touching lips, not even breath, just holding his presence there like a prayer. And for the first time, I closed my eyes. Everything in me surged forward, but I didn't move. Not because I didn't want to, but because wanting it this much was the moment. And that moment was everything. The rain came without warning, not heavy, not dramatic, just a slow, steady fall that softened the edges of everything it touched. Streetlights blurred into halos. The world shrank to the small circle of warmth around us, like the night had decided to give us privacy at last. No one said now. No one had to. It happened in the quiet way truth often does, without permission, without ceremony. One breath crossed into another, and suddenly the distance we'd guarded so carefully was gone. Her breath melted into his, warm and uneven, and when his hand finally rested against her waist, it felt less like a touch and more like an answer. Rain traced slow paths along her skin, catching in her hair, sliding down the curve of her neck. He brushed a damp strand back with his thumb, reverent, almost shy. The intimacy wasn't in the motion. It was in the pause after, when neither of them pulled away. Behind them, the night watched. The car's hood was cool now, kissed by rain, reflecting their silhouettes like a confession written in shadow. Somewhere just beyond the glow of the streetlight stood the man who loved her enough to let her be more than just his. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look away either. His presence was a steady anchor, a reminder that this wasn't betrayal. It was transformation. She leaned in first. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just a resting of her forehead against his chest, where she could feel his heart arguing with itself. Her hands slid beneath his jacket, not searching, just grounding, as if she needed to feel that he was real, that this wasn't another beautiful almost. Their bodies spoke the words they couldn't say. I see you. I want you. I'm afraid. And I'm still here. The rain grew louder, drumming softly against metal and pavement, giving them rhythm, giving them cover. When their lips finally met, it was slow, achingly so. A kiss built from hesitation, from weeks of restraint collapsing into something fragile and profound. No hunger rushed it, no urgency ruined it. It was the kind of kiss that listens as much as it takes. She exhaled against his mouth, a sound halfway between relief and surrender. His arms wrapped around her, not claiming, not conquering, just holding. Like if he loosened his grip, the moment might dissolve. Time thinned, the night blurred. They moved together without choreography, guided by instinct and trust. Skin brushed skin, warm against cool air, every contact charged with meaning. This wasn't about what they did. It was about how it felt to finally stop resisting the gravity between them. When they finally stilled, foreheads touching again, rain-soaked and breathless, Nothing had exploded. Not yet, but everything had changed. And in the quiet that followed, right before the night could ask anything more of them, they stayed there, suspended, knowing this was the point of no return. Morning came slow, pale, gray, and almost too quiet. The street looked ordinary again, the kind of ordinary that almost made you question if the night before had even happened. The pavement was still wet from the rain, glinting faintly in the early light, but everything else had dried. Everything but them. She sat on the edge of the bed, hair tangled, shirt too big, knees pulled to her chest. He stood by the window, shirtless, his breath fogging the glass as he watched the world begin again. Neither of them spoke. There was no script for this part. It wasn't regret, but it wasn't clarity either. The silence was thick, not uncomfortable, but full. Every glance they stole from each other felt like the beginning of another sentence neither of them was ready to say. Her fingers rubbed the edge of the sheet absently, trying to ground herself. She hadn't cried, but she hadn't smiled either. Then came the knock. Soft, measured. He turned. She stiffened. The door opened slowly, and there he was, her husband, holding 2 coffees in a carrier, his jaw tight, but his eyes kind, tired, knowing. "I figured you'd both need something warm," he said, voice low, offering them without accusation. She didn't move at first, but when she reached out to take hers, their fingers brushed. That same quiet lightning again. He let the moment pass. The stranger, no longer quite a stranger, took his cup too. He looked at her husband like a man trying to measure gratitude and guilt in the same breath. There was no fight, no blame, just 3 people suspended in something too big for words. "I didn't plan for this," she whispered finally. "I did," her husband said, eyes on her. "Just didn't know it would feel like this." Like what? She wanted to ask, but she already knew. The twist wasn't in the night they shared. It was in the morning they all woke up still connected, still tangled, not in body, but in truth. And somehow, impossibly, none of them had walked away. Not yet. She didn't say goodbye when he stood to leave. He paused at the door, hand resting on the frame, eyes not on her, but on the floor. Maybe that's what restraint looks like in the end. Not the night before, when everything trembled with want, but now, when you walk away with everything still burning inside you and still choose not to set the world on fire. She rose slowly, the sheet falling from her legs, but she didn't reach for him. "You were never a mistake," she said softly, her voice like dusk, warm but fading. He turned to her then, just enough for their eyes to meet. His smile was sad but real. "You weren't either," he replied. "You were the truth I didn't know how to live in." Then he stepped out into the morning, and it was just her and the man who'd watched her fall apart and still held the camera steady. Her husband sat on the edge of the couch, coffee untouched, eyes tired but open. She crossed the room, slowly, each step pulling threads behind her like silk unraveling. When she reached him, he didn't stand. He just looked up at her, like he always had. Like she was still his, even when she wasn't sure what that meant anymore. She knelt in front of him. "I don't know what we are now," she whispered. His hand came to her cheek, warm, familiar, still wanting her, not despite what happened, but maybe somehow because of it. "We're honest now," he said, brushing his lips to her forehead. And that's harder, but real. Her tears didn't fall with violence. They came quiet, grateful. She rested her head on his knee and he stroked her hair, gently, like forgiveness. They didn't promise to forget it. They didn't promise anything. But they stayed, together, in that moment. In the stillness that comes after the storm, where the world feels clearer than it did before. It wasn't about the stranger anymore. It was about the kind of love that lets you fall and stays with you while you figure out how to rise. And that kind of love was louder than any moan she'd ever made.